So if you hear some weird sounds, so I'm going to talk about the ecological effects of climate change. Many of the things I'm going to mention here, Beth already touched upon her.
Can everybody hit? Does she need a mic? Money there.
There's also a little one, Priscila, one was put on your,
I hit one. You want to hit? It's
the light bulb one. Oh, like,
All you want is to be like a rock star. Then you
I don't know, I'm doing like marketing attendant and go for a rock star. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the ecological impacts of climate change. So to this point, we have no doubt that climate change will and has already changed marine life, but we still have a lot of questions that to what extent has it changed marine life? How? Which mechanisms have been operating at this scale? And it seems like a lot of us here are biologists and ecologists. It seems like we learn a lot and we know a lot. But who saw this news yesterday?
Yes, I do.
it's on BBC. No.
Just the lectures. So it was on BBC, it was on The Guardian, it was on many different media. So the world's largest king penguin is not the emperor, but it's the second tallest penguin in the world, has declined by 88% actually. And we don't exactly know how that has happened, but we suspect that it has a lot to do with climate change. There are other things, there are other possible drivers going on. So maybe there's avian cholera, maybe it's because they were really overcrowded at first, and since there's food shortage because of climate change, so that has added another complication to their life. Maybe it's because there has been stronger and amplified El Niños in the last years that pushed fish and squid far away from their foraging zone. So, like, even for a big species like that, we still have so much to learn about. So people say that if you repeat things enough times, you actually learn. This is the third time we're going to say here that where is global warming going? To the ocean. Okay? And we'll see. Even the slides may be repeated. Maybe that means that the lecturers didn't sit together before and talked about what they're going to say. Or that we just wanted you guys to really learn a couple of things. So most of the warming is going to the ocean, but more than that, as Lohan explained really well, it's going to specific parts of the ocean. So in the last years, we are seeing more going to the deeper waters, but most of it is still on the surface water. And we already heard about the stressors. And at this point, because of the two lectures before, we know that that's much more than just warming happening. We have the physical chemical stressors, that's temperature, light that can pass through the water, changes in the pH. We have the biological stressors, like having predators coming to an area, having competitors coming to an area, or even diseases coming to an area. So this is one example that was a paper done with the species in Australia, shark. So they exposed the eggs of the shark to a regular temperature of 28 degrees and then to 32 degrees. And what we see here is that after being exposed for just a couple of weeks to a higher temperature, this shark, which is just a baby shark, didn't really develop this mark properly on its body. Even after they returned the baby shark to regular temperature, this is 4 months after the shark was back to 28 degrees. And why is this important? We actually don't know exactly why it's important, because we don't know exactly why this mark is relevant. Maybe it's a way, it's a camouflage for the shark, it's a way that's going to protect it from predators. Maybe it's a sign that helps with sexual selection. But we know that temperature in this case has changed the coloring pattern of this species here. The most common stressors that we have are, again, acidification, which you see the effects on the calcification process for species that calcify, the warming effect, that Lohan already talked a lot about stratification, but also because temperature can increase metabolic rates, it can change the solubility constant, increase or decrease salinity. It's not, I think that that's also clear by now, that things won't happen the same way all over the world. In some areas, like enclosed bodies, water bodies, we may have increased salinity, but in areas where rain is supposed to increase, we can have decreased salinity. That's also going to have effects on different species. And then, again, this has been talked about. One of the stressors is eutrophication. But how does that happen? For example, in areas where there is increased waterfall, we're going to be putting a lot more of the agriculture runoff in the seas. So that's how eutrophication can happen, and that's why it happens really close to the coast usually. We also have changes in your coastal currents, both because of rising sea level, but also because of our own structures. To deal with rising sea levels, we build dikes, we break waters, which causes even further changes in these currents. And another stressor is the appearance of new species, exotic species, invasive species, that they can have a better chance to spread under some conditions. So this is a classical example. This algae here, it's an edible algae, also with pharmaceutical importance. People use it to lose weight, for example. It used to be very common from the intertidal zone up to 15 meters. But it has undergone a decrease of 90% in only 40 years. In some areas now, you can only find it from the intertidal area up to 3 meters deep. There are different theories or different hypotheses trying to explain why this is happening to these specific species. One of them is the eutrophication, because it makes hard for light to pass through, and it would explain why it doesn't occur below 6 meters, but it doesn't explain why it doesn't occur between 6 and 3 meters, for example. So there are other agents in action there. For example, warmer waters usually increase the metabolic rates of different species. So animals become hungrier, grazers become hungrier. And there is also more intense bacterial attacks. When they become hungry, they graze on this much more. There's also the gradient thermoclimate that we talked about here too, that can impact the defense of this species. But associated to that, we also have, at the same time, another species coming from Asia and occupying the space of that algae. And why is this species doing better there, and that one, the original one, is not doing so well? Well, they both require similar habitats, but this one is not so interesting to predators. So it doesn't have so much grazers working on it. This one tolerates these higher gradients that now we have between the colder and the deeper and the surface water. The previous algae is used to a smaller gradient. This one can tolerate this stronger change here. More than that, it can reproduce sexually and asexually. And if that's not enough, this species also works as a hiding place for grazers of the other species that doesn't graze here, just graze on the other one. And to make matters worse, it also secretes some inhibition of germination of the previous one. So this one is super happy, but the other one not so. The impacts we have can be at the individual and population level, but can also be at the community level. And some of these impacts can interact between populations and community, making it even worse. So first we're going to look at this part of this figure, and then we're going to look at the emergent ecological response. So the most classical example that I think we are all familiar with in terms of response to temperature is the effect we have, for example, on corals. But in general, the temperature can cause protein damage, can affect the fluidity of membrane, and can affect organ function of different species. But it should be clear that not all species will be sad with climate change, as we just saw with the other algae. Some will be very happy, just like, Beth being able to swim in Tasmania. Some people will like it, some animals, some plants will like it too. But not for corals, because they already live close to their upper thermal tolerance. And what we've been seeing in the last years is a lot of coral bleaching and mortality. We've been registering coral bleaching since the 80s, but on a global scale, we have 3 major events, 98, 2010, and the last one a couple of years ago. So this was observed all over the world. But the impacts that we saw were different in different parts of the world. For example, in Australia, so this is the Great Barrier. This is the red it is, it means that more than 60% of the corals bleached. When it's green, it means that less than 1% of it bleached. And we can see that in 98, this area was more affected. In 2002, a little more in the center. In 2016, it's basically all over, but the north got really affected. In Brazil, for example, the recovery was really good. The corals bleached, but it recovered really fast, which is not necessarily the case here. But what's really interesting in this study was that they were able to separate the effects of temperature from fishing, for example. And they saw that from water quality to eutrophication. So they saw the fishing pressure had nothing to do, basically, with the intensity of coral bleaching in the Great Barrier. And this is not good news, because that means that if you only have local actions, let's say, let's just control fishing here because corals will be more resilient, that doesn't seem to be the case for this specific area here. What really explains the percentage of corals that have bleached is the number of weeks of high temperature. So the higher the number of weeks with above the average temperature, the higher the chance of corals that will bleach. Also, the fact that a coral bleached before does not make it less susceptible to bleaching again. So whoever did bad in the past may as well bleach again in the future. It doesn't necessarily build any kind of resilience to them. So here we are looking at pictures of the Great Barrier, the different areas. So here, for example, that's all Great Barrier, okay? The Australians can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I understand. So here we have close to 100% of the corals that bleached. Large corals, old corals, also bleached and died. Here we can see that some species did not recover even when they bleached in 97. By 2016, the area hadn't recovered. So that's very different than what we saw in Brazil. And for some other species, when they bleached in 2016, the area was immediately colonized by algae. So that's of course, it's gonna make it hard for them to recover in the future. The response to temperature is going to vary within and among species. So if we look at the fish, for example, temperature can act in different enzymes and in different hormones. So these names are familiar because we also have the same kind of hormones, FSH, LH. These are all hormones that control reproduction. What we see here is LH, for example. When it's in bold, it means that this hormone gets inhibited by temperature. When it's in italics, like, this one, dopamine, it means that it's stimulated by high temperature. And some of the hormones are okay, they don't care about the temperature. But that means that for fish, it's going to have a lot of impact on the time of their reproduction, and it can actually stop their reproduction depending on the species, depending on the place. The effect will depend on the amplitude and the period from the increase. So some of them will just shift the period of reproduction, and some of them may stop reproduction at all. For other species, like this bivalve, for example, they saw that the timing of the genetic transition changed. warmer years, it started reproducing earlier. The problem here is that this species depends on phytoplankton. But phytoplankton did not bloom at the same time that the species reproduced. So basically, you have baby bivalves in the water with nothing to eat. So that has an effect on their growth and also an effect on their survival. Or, in terms of community, we can have cases where, I said before, when the temperature is higher, some species may just get hungrier. This one, for example, the sea star, it starts grazing much more on mussels under higher temperatures. So this is a quelling event. It's a little colder here, but then when the temperature is a little higher, these species start interacting much more, and interaction in this case means feeding on it. So, and the effect it's not restricted to the mussels itself, because the mussels form a matrix of, like a bed of habitat where different species occur. So when you lose this bed of habitat, you're not only losing the mussels, but you're also losing a lot of species that occur in that area. And then we have response to sea level rise, which we expect to result in upward shift in species distribution because there's going to be less habitat available as the water takes this habitat. In some areas, we're expecting the intertidal habitat to be reduced from 20 to up to 70% over the next 100 years in parts of North America, for example. Again, this is a huge loss in terms of, because some species only occur in these intertidal habitats. If you lose 70% of that, you're losing a lot. The species diversity or biomass or whatever. Part of that is supposed to be stronger in North America, both because of the topography, but again, because of all the structures we have been building to deal with climate change, or because we want our promenades and waterfront to look in a certain way. And then we have response to changes in circulation, so changes again in upwelling. I'm going to show you soon that this has an effect on reproduction in benthic and planktonic algae. We also have increased frequency of extreme winds, which Lohan also talked a little bit about that. I'm going to show the effects on different species. So what's the consequence of having more storms, of having more cyclones, for example, in different areas? We can expect it to affect the very delicate, the very sensitive habitats like the intertidal and shallow subtidal systems. But not only that, so this is for the Caribbean, where they've been following different corals before hurricanes and after hurricanes. This is change in coral percent cover before and after. What the authors conclude is that at 8 years after a hurricane, the corals haven't recovered yet. Again, this depends on the habitat, this depends on the place where you are, but still pretty serious. Or these are all different corals in the Great Barrier and different cyclones that happen in different periods there. I don't know if one of these is the one that was mentioned previously, a strong one, but these are 3 major cyclones in Australia, and this is hard coral covers. Different cyclones, different periods, and they were able to recover, but then when 3 major ones came, the species both fish and also the coral cover did not recover in the central and southern part of the Great Barrier. They were not able to recover after a few years. In terms of fish, Beck showed a different work on that, a different paper on that, but the idea is the same. So different species haven't recovered. They simply disappeared or went down in terms of richness, in terms of biomass, they disappeared or went down from the corals. Some species more than others, so large herbivores, for example, but in general, this is the overall trend. The pH reduction that Lohan talked about so much before, the effect is really strong on the calcifying animals, just because with less carbonated ion available, there is some difficulty both in building and also in corroding the shells. Two different cases here. So here we are looking at this muscle. This is a really strong effect. So I don't know if I remember correct, but Lohan said that since 1925 the decrease has been 0.1, right? So these guys here are predicting something terrible, like a decrease of 0.7, and then they're seeing what happens to these muscles. Under such a crazy decrease, they're seeing that there's lower metabolic rate and a lower growth in muscle. So hypercarpnia is a very low pH, so you see that the shell length decrease, and normocarpia considering the regular pH. But this is not reality, so this is experiments done in the labs, and they were playing with different values. How about if the world came to a point where the pH is so low? And this is what you would see. But then these guys here did something different. Instead, they lowered the pH by only 0.03 units. So that's much less than we actually saw, that we've been seeing it happening. And in this case, they were looking at both gastropods and sea urchins. And we can see like the control situation where the pH is normal, or what we used to know as normal, and with a tiny reduction of it. The survivalship for both species go down in a significant manner, even with a tiny decrease in the pH. The pH, the reduction in the pH also has an effect on how fish settle in different areas. Fish larvae relies on their olfact, on their audition, and also on their vision to locate and select a settlement site. Acidification affects the three of them, at least in coral reef fish. For some of the species that we know that acidification will have an effect on the three senses of some species. So for barramundi, for example, they showed that lower pH can force them to have an earlier metamorphosis, faster growth, which is not necessarily the best thing under different circumstances, reduce swimming speeds, and since parts of their senses are not working properly, they don't find the best habitat to settle. So their survival is also affected because they can't really locate the best habitat to establish themselves. And there is also response to UV. Even though we managed to deal with part of our UV problem along the years, there's still part of it that can be depleted as we increase CO2, but the impacts of ultraviolet on species seem to depend on multiple factors that we don't quite understand yet. One of these factors seem to be how the species that are there interact. So it's not only having algae being exposed to UV, and that's going to reduce their biomass, which is what this graph here is showing. So PAR is regular light, this is PAR plus UVA, regular light plus UVA and UVB, and full sun. So we see here that when exposed to UVA and B, the biomass of this algae decreases, But in the presence of a full community or part of the community with the different species interacting there, the effect of the UV light may change. So we don't know how that works yet, so we are just beginning to understand. And then we also have the emergent ecological response. One that we started talking about here in the previous lectures are the changes in primary and secondary production. This kind of change, which has significant effects for fisheries, can be caused by changes it's going to be affected by changes in distribution of habitat and type, bathymetric latitudinal ranges of important species. We didn't see this yet. It looks like a lot of the graphs we saw before, but this is a different one. What we are seeing here is the sea surface temperature anomaly. So Lohan showed similar graphs to that. But what really matters here is how this graph relates to this one. And this is the phytoplankton productivity. What we see, like Lohan explained that really well, is that when we have higher temperatures in some areas, the productivity decreases. But more than that, and Beth talked a little bit about that too, when we have, we don't only have lower biomass of phytoplankton. So this is the general biomass. It's decreasing. This is different part of the North Atlantic. The overall biomass of phytoplankton decreases as temperature increases, but it's not only that, it's also the quality of this phytoplankton that's going to be affected. Beth explained that with the smaller phytoplankton, we can have changes in the whole food web. What we see here is that some species, especially the little ones, the pico phytoplankton, they do well under higher temperature. So overall we have lower biomass, but also a change in the size of the cells that are occurring there, with consequences to the food web. We also have, in terms of primary and secondary production, replacement of microalgae for seagrasses in some localities. Well, microalgae evolved in a more recent period, so they are used to the kind of carbon concentration we have in the atmosphere. But these guys here, they evolved earlier, in a period where we had a lot more carbon in the atmosphere. So today they feel like they need more carbon. So in a world where we have more carbon, they'll actually feel good, they'll like it. But these ones won't. So these are carbon saturated and these are carbon limited. It's just like, so these guys kind of work like regular terrestrial plants. They get happy with more carbon. And just as Lohan was saying, that we know a lot about we can predict a lot what's gonna happen on a global scale. On a local scale, things are a little more difficult to predict. So this is a modeling done for the Namibia coast in terms of primary and secondary production. This is their regular food web. They have a weak to moderate upwelling on the coast. This is what they have regularly. They have the phytoplankton production, the zooplankton that comes and eats the phytoplankton, and some of the fish, some rock lobsters, some species of hake. And this forms their conventional local food web. If things happen the way they are predicted to happen, with some more intense upwelling on this coast, they expect one of the possible things that may happen is that the zooplankton will not be able to swim in this area because they are not strong swimmers. So they'll be taken away to open waters. And the phytoplankton is going to grow kind of out of control here. And without the zooplankton to prey upon them, a lot of them will just die. It's deposited on the bottom. And that's going to release a lot of gases to the atmosphere. So that's one possibility. And with impact on the food chain, because some of the species that were here and that fishermen exploit, it won't be here. But there's also a second possibility, And this one is, with more phytoplankton productivity, yes, the zooplankton will be taken away because they're not strong swimmers. But maybe sardines, which are strong swimmers, will be able to make it. And that will result in an increase of fish production, at least of this kind of fish. So you end up losing the traditional fish, but you may end up with more sardines, which can also support the fisheries that happen in the area. Two different possibilities, two different economic results for this case. But there's more than, okay, economically this may even be better if that happens. But it doesn't mean we're not losing species and changing the whole ecosystem here. But this is just to show that we still have a lot to understand and to learn how to predict things at a local scale. This is another one that shows how species are expected to change, both in terms of diversity as in terms of where they occur. So this study was done by William Sheng, who was also cited here before. This is one of his oldest classical ones. So he modeled more than 1,000 different marine fish and invertebrates. And what we see here in the first one is where it's red, it's more likely to happen. So where species invasion are more expected to occur, so the Arctic, the polars are supposed to be more affected by species invasion. Here where we see local extinctions, so again, the polar regions are expected to have a lot of extinctions, but also the tropics in this case. Actually, like a good part of the world, but the tropics and the polars are expected to have more local extinction. And this is where species turnover is more likely to happen. So now the northern Arctic is expected to suffer a lot with changes in the future. We also expect the kind of zooplankton to occur in each area to change. So today we have that zooplanktons that occur in the tropic, in the polar region are specialist species. But with changing temperature, these ones, the generalist ones, the ones who can eat everything, are the ones that are going to do better. So again, like not only this can have consequences on biomass, but also consequence on the species diversity. So what we're having here is gonna be completely different in terms of the species that occur in the tropics, species that occur in the temperate zones too. And this is again zooplankton. If we look at, so on the first line, on the first row, we have from 58 to 81, and then from 82 to 99. And we're looking at mesozooplankton assemblages. Here we're looking at warm, temperate, pseudo-oceanic species, temperate, cold mixed water, and subarctic species. These guys, they expand, they go up north. From this period here, you see that it's expanding slowly towards the north zone. These guys are also expanding because probably the temperate zone is now a little too warm for them and they find the northern part a little bit more comfortable. And the guys that were happy in the cold areas before, they're losing part of their zone, distributional zone, as the ocean warms. Species turnover because some of the species, like even if we look at the same genus, Mimici, some sort of a little shrimp here, we're looking at the same genus. One of them cannot tolerate changes in temperature. Even like slight change in temperature, the species cannot occur there. This is for France. So this one has basically disappeared from the coast of France, while this other one, which hadn't been detected before in the past, is now growing considerably. They're relatives. They are close relatives, but one is doing pretty badly and the other one is doing well. This is another zooplankton. This is called, if you're not familiar, these are the copepods. So copepods are important for fish, for example. A lot of fish prey on copepods. If we look at them, this is just one genus, Calanus, Calanos have been decreasing along the last decades in different parts of the world, but even if the overall trend is a general decrease, if you look at two different species of calanos, it's the same situation we saw here. This species here is not doing so bad. Overall, the zooplankton is decreasing, but this one proportionally is much more abundant than it was before, and it actually has a higher biomass now. Another point is that under a warmer ocean, some species might just invade. I'm just showing one species of non-native ascidians. How is ascidian called in English? Skirt?
Sea squirt.
Sea skirt. Okay. So we're just looking at one species of exotic ascidian. Under warmer months, under warmer winters, we see this exotic one starts reproducing a little earlier than before. This study was actually done for multiple species of ascidians. I'm just showing one. For all the exotic ones, the effect was exactly the same. If the winter is a little warmer, the exotic species starts reproducing earlier. But the same is not true for the native species. It keeps reproducing only when it gets to its right temperature. So of course, it loses ground when something like that happens. So this is the native one, for example. And these are two of the exotic ones. So we're looking at their annual recruitment rate here, non-natives, the open dots, and natives, the dark dots. And even though it doesn't really seem like a linear relation to me, that's how the authors plotted it, what they see is that native ones, their annual recruitment goes down, while the non-native ones together, I think it's 3 or 4 species, they go up when you have warmer winters. And here we are seeing their growth for the native. Native is this one here, and the 2 non-native ones. Under regular temperature, or like warm but not so warm, they do not do so different. But when it's really hot, then the non-native ones, these two, they do better than the native one, especially this species here. So we can probably expect some species to take over the place of the native ones. And finally, in terms of microevolutionary change, Beth also talked a little bit about that. There are multiple mechanisms that we can have evolution happening on a time scale that we can actually see it. We already figured that out with fisheries, for example, because we know that fisheries remove a specific size of the community and then you select for animals that are smaller. But more than that, there are multiple ways that evolution can happen under a situation of climate change. However, the ability, so we were saying before, species have the capacity to adapt. But not all of them, and not all of them will have the same capacity to adapt. That depends on multiple biological factors. For example, their dispersal mode. So for this seagrass, for example, if they depend on megafauna for their dispersion, first of all, you have to assure that the megafauna is there. You have to have the turtles, you have to have whatever big animal you need for them to disperse. It also depends on climate-related change in terms of abundance and distribution and how the larva is transported. If an animal has a long generation time, this one will have much more difficulty to adapt. But the faster the reproduction happens to each species, the more likely that species is likely to adapt. So for smaller animals with short lifespan, you can see the evolution happening, and you can see that some of them can do well. One of the forces through which microevolution happens is by genetic trait. I find this example here very clear to understand how genetic trait works. So you have like a diversity within the same species. Let's see that this one has a gene for being green, this one has a gene for being a brown cockroach, but if you accidentally just kill the green one, maybe because they are more visible, then you ended up with a lower diversity. If something happens here that they need to adapt to a new situation, let's suppose these are marine animals, they have to adapt to a lower pH in the ocean, they might not have the DNA, the kind of diversity in their genetics to adapt to that. So this is one of the mechanisms. And this study here is not really looking at genetic diversity, but it's also looking on some, we don't know exactly the mechanism behind here, but it could be something like Beth mentioned before, epigenetics. It could be maternal effect, which I don't think so because it's already like many generations here. But here it is experiments. So there are a lot of people doing this kind of experiment in labs now. In this experiment, they got a population of a phytoplankton, the same population, and they divided in 3 groups. And they waited 500 generations. But each of the population, each of the subpopulation was exposed to a different CO2 concentration, so different pH basically. One, like something normal, 400. This one, 1100. And this one, 2200. What they saw is, the guys that were exposed to a higher concentration of CO2 for 500 generations, when they were exposed for real, when they measured their growth, these guys did better because in the end they selected for those that could tolerate more carbon. However, even if they do better than the ones that didn't suffer any kind of acclimatization, they didn't calcify as much as the others. So calcification rates were lower under increased CO2 for all of the species, but the ones that were able to spend 500 generations under a high levels of CO2, they calcified 50% more than the others, even if the general picture is not good for anyone. And I think that's it. Thank you.